Good morning. My name is Malcolm Young. I'm the Dean of Grace Cathedral. Welcome to the Forum. We have a very exciting morning planned. San Quentin has been so much on my mind lately. We had Patrick Makuakane, the kumu hula, the Hawaiian hula dancing expert who has been ministering to prisoners there in San Quentin. And then about a week later, Governor Gavin Newsom ordered a moratorium on the death penalty. What does this mean for the men and women, 737 of them on death row in California? Our guest today serves as chaplain for the San Francisco 49ers and the Golden State Warriors, and he was the youngest chaplain ever hired by the California Department of Corrections when he became the chaplain at San Quentin in 1983. It was a post he held for 23 years, which in pastoring years is just lifetimes.
A few lifetimes.
Yeah, few, 4. In the year 2000, he was named National Correctional Chaplain of the Year, and he's the author of Death Row Chaplain, Unbelievable True Stories from America's Most Notorious Prison. Please join me in welcoming Reverend Earl Smith.
Thank you. Thank you.
I enjoyed your book so much. I was just saying that I'm reading the Michelle Obama Becoming book,
right.
And this is just so much more concentrated. It's just like, every page, there's just so much in it. And I don't know if it's just my own life experiences, but I found it tremendously powerful. For everything from the beginning to the end. You talk a lot about just kind of what it was like growing up in Stockton. I wonder if you can talk a little bit just about how your family got there and just what kind of changes you saw. One of the things Michelle Obama talks about is just how much her neighborhood just changed during the course of her childhood. And I wonder what kind of changes you noticed in Stockton as you were growing up.
When I grew up, thank you first of all for allowing me to be here. When I grew up in Stockton, it was number one for crime per capita in the United States. Stockton was a segregated town.
Yeah.
I paid to be bused to school. They didn't even have city school buses.
Wow.
And if we didn't pay, we got jumped on the way.
Right.
Because
you have to walk through the neighborhoods of the kids who don't want you there.
Well, not only the kids, but the teachers at the school also lived in the neighborhood. And so it was a really crazy time. I remember riots in the junior high school. The police would come in with their dogs and we'd get bit, and it was crazy. It was a crazy time. Trying to figure out what life really meant. You think you're angry, you start to be upset about your existence, and then I get kicked out of public school in the 9th grade, and I end up going to a private Catholic school, and when I got there, I realized all people weren't the same. I thought I hated people, but I didn't. I just didn't understand. And Stockton went from a place that I hated to a place where I started to understand as I went from one school to another.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I think so much about just like how intense that experience was. And I wonder like what kind of heroes that you had, like how did you make it through it? I mean, where did you find your source of kind of inner strength?
My dad was my hero.
Yeah.
My dad was my hero. Unbelievable guy. And then when I was in junior high school, there was a man named Bob Powell, and I got kicked out of class, and they sent me to a separate class. And the guy I fought with, who was the leader of the white group, we fought every time we saw each other, we fought, and everyone knew it. And they put us in this class together, and he set a chessboard up, and my sister had brought a guy from Stanford that showed me how to move. And he had Randy and I look at this board. We're fighting. And Randy looks at me and he says, okay, well, I'll take the white if you take the black. And so we played chess. He never took the black pieces until the last week of school.
Wow.
And we just played. He says, okay, you move first. And it became a deal where I started to understand Randy.
Right.
And so and then years later, I meet his nephew and son, and he had told them about us playing chess.
Wow.
But so my dad and Bob Powell were the guys that sort of helped shape it. Elementary school, there was a guy named Charles Howard, but and then my sister, my oldest sister went away to Stanford, would come home every other week just to check on me, bring me books to read, bring people from Stanford. So there was all these different people that were trying to pour into me, but the streets were really calling me more than anything.
Yeah, no, I can imagine from just hearing your story. What happened to your sister? I mean, I heard her. She was 20 years old last time I heard her in the book.
Yeah.
Is she okay? Did her life turn out okay?
My sister is a retired judge. She wrote the Political Reform Act with March Fung Yu, with the Secretary of State. She was Marvin Dimley's chief analyst when he was lieutenant governor, and
had a great career just like you.
Yeah, God's been really gracious to her. When I was, she was a little older than 20 because she's the one that kept me out of prison.
Right.
After I got shot.
Yeah. In your book, you describe just what it's like to just kind of make those little decisions that kind of set you down a path that is a dangerous path for a person, and you describe what it felt like being shot. Maybe you can describe that experience, and then what it means to you when you hear all these debates about gun control, those kinds of things. Like how does it sound different to you as a result of your own life story?
Well, it seemed like everyone had guns when I grew up.
Yeah.
And being shot or listening to this whole debate about gun control, I guess it would be different for me because I understand that it's the person that first of all has the weapon. When I got shot, I couldn't get to my gun or else I would have shot the guy. And that was the way. But the debate, as you start to see more and more people with weapons and what they're doing with the weapons, I believe that there's this whole element in society today of pure hatred, and you can't even speak to it. When we grew up with guns, it was to protect ourselves. It was, I was committing crimes. People were committing crimes against me. When I got shot, it was because I was wrong.
Right.
And I understood that it wasn't personal, it was business. I had someone that wanted to kill me because of what I was and what I was doing. I understood that. Now people are having joy in killing people or shooting people, and that's when you have to start to understand, what is this whole thing about weapons that would give a person the opportunity just to randomly go out and try to destroy people they know nothing about.
Yeah, and it's good to be reminded too that it all happens in a context, and that context is a racialized context. It's a context having to do with poverty. There's a lot of things mixed up in it, and just you can't take just one thing out of it.
No, you don't. I mean, we try to. Somehow we want to shape it and make it our story.
Yeah.
Yet the story is much bigger. But the thing that's in common is the weapon.
Yeah.
It's that gun. It's that thing that people are able to get a hold of, and in the process of getting that thing, destroy so many people. So there may be hatred, but if you take that weapon, if you take the vehicle that they drive with their hatred away, that changes the mode of the hatred.
Right, exactly. So people can be a little bit more free if there's not that extra element in it. One of the things that strikes me so much is just, first of all, you're such a charismatic figure. I mean, we've met before, and I think anybody who meets you knows that. But there is a way in which you have worked in all male environments. For the Boy Scouts, for prison, for professional sports, and I wonder what makes you particularly effective in those kind of environments.
Well, for me, going back to the Boy Scouts, I did the inner city services for here in San Francisco, and I saw a lot of kids that were like me.
Yeah.
I saw a lot of kids that were trying to figure life out, and only job I applied for out of when I undergrad school was the Boy Scouts. I never applied for another job, and that was the job I received, and I got it in Dallas. They sent me here. What I saw in those kids was a lack of hope, and I knew that if I couldn't pour into them, they could end up like me.
Yeah.
They could end up in a very bitter situation. Going into prison, my guys were there. Guys from my gang, guys from enemies.
Right, exactly.
You know, they were there. They were all there. And
then guys who were like them but just weren't from Stockton, the guys who you didn't know but who were from Oakland or from Richmond,
Oakland,
Vallejo.
LA, Richmond, I mean, they were from all over,
Yeah.
and everything was segregated by race.
Yeah,
and then within the pockets of race, there was separation.
Yeah.
And so I was assigned to a tier that, you know, it was, yet I understood. I tell people the best place I could have been in was prison, because I understood the mentality and the thought process of what gets you. I tell people, and then I'll get to your next question. I tell people that prison is just detention. You're incarcerated before you ever get to prison. And so we keep on saying the person's incarcerated at prison, but actually they're detained. And I was incarcerated, but I was never detained in San Quentin. I was able to go back and forth.
Right.
And I actually...
So incarcerated is being just kind of like this mental space where there's nowhere out for you. And detained is like your body being contained, but your spirit still being free.
Right. And so you're detained in this man-made facility. And the reason there's recidivism is because people do time and they never deal with their incarceration.
Yeah.
They're released, still incarcerated.
Right. So they're out in the world, but they're still in a prison in their
Exactly.
emotional life.
Exactly. So for me, working at San Quentin gave me the opportunity to address incarceration. The detention process was nothing, I had nothing to do with that, but I felt like my job was to address people's incarceration.
Yeah, and I love that too. So what's your message to people who are in prison? I mean, you know, what was your kind of driving aim in terms of what you were hoping to communicate with them?
Every guy was different, but the one thing that I really wanted people in that prison environment to understand is you can change. There's a difference in your crime and who you are. You're not your crime. And so many people, they said, you're a murderer, you're a rapist, you're a thief. And I would say, that's what you did.
Yeah.
But that does not have to be who you are.
Yeah.
So if I can separate you from what you did to get you to understand who you are, and when they talk about rehabilitation, it means to turn oneself back to one's former self. Well, for me, using that thought process, I would say, well, I got to figure out, can I help you get back to where you were? Guy would say, man, I've been doing time since I was 5, 6 years old. I've been in foster care. I've been in all these facilities. And I said, okay, let's find a point when you weren't.
Right.
Because that's where we have to start the rehabilitation. We want to get back to that point, and let's grow from there.
Yeah, that's so important and such a powerful message, I think, for everyone. Because you're right, there's incarcerated people all around us.
Yes.
And we may not even recognize that they are when we're engaging them. It takes a while to know.
People that are workaholics are incarcerated. I mean, there's so many different things that we have to try to figure out, how can we break this? How can we break the cycle of incarceration? People that are workaholics may be so incarcerated that when they get home, they don't pay attention to their children, their wife.
Right.
How do you break that? So prison was just detention.
So what was it like that, kind of like the first week that you were there? I mean, what do you think that people who are ordinary people who don't have very much experience of prison life, like what are their misconceptions about what it's about?
I think a lot of people that don't understand prison would think that the guys it's just horrible, it's a horrible existence. For me, I understood that they were probably worse than what I thought and not as bad as people from outside thought, because people commit crime. I mean, there's crime all the time. For us to understand prison, you go in, you start to see guys, and you start to try to figure out, how can I understand this person? And some of the crimes that guys have committed in prison, you just want, with the grace of God gives you the ability to look beyond the crime to try to find the person. whether it's death row or wherever it may be. You want to do that because prison can leave you wounded, so then you can walk out wounded if you don't figure out something beyond the moment.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's what I loved about hearing about that. I mean, there must have been, like we were saying, it's almost like 4 careers worth of chaplaincy ministry at San Quentin. I mean, it was 23 years. I served at church for 13 years. It seemed like forever, and another 10 years on that. I can't even imagine that. But so there are different phases where, and it must have been different. The first 5 years must have been different than the mid 10 years. But maybe you can talk a little bit about specialized ministries there. I'm interested in learning more about the choir that you're involved in forming, and just what that was like.
Well, the choir was formed because Larry, Danny, Gidra, some other people, Larry Brilliant, who's
Right
here, brought the monks in, and our guys did not want to have the monks in our chapel. They said they can't be in our chapel.
So Tibetan monks coming
Tibetan
from,
monks,
yeah.
and they said this is our space, and I said, well, they're my guest.
Yeah.
And so the guys stayed in the back room, and I said, you guys come on, and Wavy Gravy has a propeller hat on, and you got to understand. I could understand why those guys were like, you're letting these guys in our chapel? It's But here's what happens. As the monks started to chant, there was a sound that just sort of carried throughout the chapel, and our guys started coming out one by one, and they sat down, and when it was over, I told my guys, I need everyone to get up and hug someone. And don't hug anyone from your own race, and don't hug anyone you know. And it was amazing how you saw men and women. It was just sort of like this thing fell apart, and there was this love that flowed through, and our guys said, we want to sing too. And they started to sing Amazing Grace, and as they were singing Amazing Grace, it started to fill, and the people in the audience just started to fill. And that was how we had the choir. But from that point, Danny Riffington got Mickey, and we did a recording, He's All I Need, but it was all because there was a breakthrough with guys who, for some reason, in prison thought they were better than other people.
Right. So they didn't see the Tibetan monks as real human
they
beings.
couldn't. There was a level of lack of compassion and understanding, and when that broke, it broke the institution, it broke the prison, because there was this whole different level of acceptance and love for guys who were trying to be loved and accepted, who for a moment realized they were like other people. They were not accepting, and so it broke. So that was the choir. Yeah,
it's so interesting it's like such a segregated place, and I see you as such a bridge builder between different people of different races, different backgrounds, different gangs, even. And how did you do that ministry? I mean, how did you build bridges? And is San Quentin as segregated a place as it was when you first arrived, or what signs of hope do you see for it?
Well, when I first arrived, everything was 13 months of the 16 months I was there. There was a lockdown. Someone was being killed, and you let them out, someone else gets killed or stabbed. And, I was praying, God, you have me here, and there's 3 people that come to chapel. Huge chapel, seats 380 people.
Oh, no. That's so demoralizing.
So I'm like, what do you have me here doing? And it was like this voice says, well, you need to get to the leaders. So I got all the leaders of the different gangs, had one guy that worked security help me out, a lieutenant, and I sat him and I said, guys, I want to have chapel. What do I need to do? And I said, I tell you what, if you can tell me that we're not going to have a stabbing, I gave them so many days. I said, we'll have a banquet. You can invite all your people. You can have 2 guests. We're going to have a meal in here. And I said, the night before, I'll have a special meal just for you. And they said, what? And I said, yeah, and I don't know, I'm talking crazy.
Right,
I don't even have permission
Yeah,
yet.
right.
You know, I'm just believing this. And they took me up on it. And one guy got stabbed, and the people that ran his section, his race, made him turn himself in to stab him.
No.
Because they didn't want to be seen as the ones that broke the peace.
Right.
And we had this meal where every guy was able to submit their names of their guys. They were able to invite 2 guests into the chapel.
Yeah.
Security was just like, it's going to go off for sure.
Yeah.
And it didn't.
Yeah.
They sat there. We had a guest come in, Bubba Paris, and
right.
we had service. And those guys saw that could be a safe spot.
Yeah.
And from that point, they told their different groups, if you want to go to chapel, it's okay.
Wow, and that's the beginning.
So now, we went from 3 to, it would be people just standing out in the foyer.
Yeah,
it was just,
great.
there wasn't enough seats. And it broke the racial tension. We were able to have baseball. We were able to do a lot of things.
Yeah.
But it all started when we were able to have that moment where guys said it's okay to go to the chapel.
Yeah, I love that, and I wonder too. A lot of us have coached like youth teams, and is there what do you learn from coaching that's helpful for chaplaincy work, and is there and vice versa?
I think coaching the baseball team, you learn that you have to get to people where they are.
Yeah.
And in ministry, it's the same thing. In ministry, if your expectations are above the person's expectations, and if you start to want to believe more about what they can do than themselves, you'll feel like a failure.
Yeah.
In baseball, in the prison, you had guys who had played Little League ball.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about that. There must be guys who are so much more who are so much more advanced than you in baseball, and who almost made it to the pros.
We had a guy that actually was in the Dodgers farm system.
Oh, wow, yeah.
We had Ricky Henderson's brothers in. We had all these guys. The thing was, there was something about them that was undisciplined.
Right.
And so baseball was a game that once you get between the lines, race doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
And we didn't have a field. So for months, we built a field. And what we did, they didn't realize that we were just building community.
Yeah.
Because when you build community, people watch the community grow. So people that may have been enemies because of gangs were no longer enemies because they had this thing in common, this thing called baseball.
Yeah.
That you could play, that you could put a uniform on, and when you put the uniform on, the colors you were wearing was your group, that was your gang.
Exactly. Yeah.
So now you protect your guys. And it became this unbelievable moment where guys started to appreciate each other. We had guys that, we had our third baseman, I don't know if I put it in the book, but he had one arm. And he would field the ball and then take the ball, tuck the glove in, and throw a guy out.
Wow, that's amazing.
But he could play ball.
Yeah.
And he loved it. And how many people would look at him and says he can't do it?
Right, exactly.
But he told me he wanted to play. Now, what if I would have just told him, man, you can't play
It's
baseball?
obvious, yeah.
He was good.
Yeah.
We had a guy that played first base for me who told me he was innocent. And I said, okay. His name was Frank O'Connell. I said, okay. He kept coming back. He says, no, coach, I'm really innocent. I get him in touch with Centurion Ministries, and he's home now because he was innocent.
Yeah. You must have seen enough cases like that too. The death penalty is just so much on our minds and on our hearts, and you've been closer to that than anybody will meet. What did you learn in ministering to people on death row, and what did you learn about their families? How does that change your take on capital punishment?
We ministers, chaplains are supposed to be people of hope. Yet when you're dealing with death row, you speak about finality.
Yeah.
you speak about what a system says, and what you have to do is understand, people talk about the execution as bringing closure. There's no word, that word should not be associated with an execution, because the process that you watch when someone is executed is ingrained in your mind forever, first of all. So there's no closure if you're continuing to carry it.
Right, exactly.
And so they keep telling people it's about closure. It's not about closure. The other thing is, there are people that have done enormous harm. And I would think, okay, so they say, let's execute him. What has that done? I mean, so he's no longer available, she's no longer available, but has it done anything for the person? Guys on death row would rather there's guys on death row that would rather be executed than do life sentences.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, there's a guy on death row that killed one of my relatives, and my aunt told me, well, when it's his turn, baby, we're going to have to be there. And I said, what? And I didn't know, because I made a point of never reading.
I remember that.
When there was a capital case, I would never read about it, because I wanted to not be tainted with my thought process.
Yeah.
And I said, why? And she says, well, baby, he's the one that killed your cousin. I'm like, why would you want to be there or see that? I said, first of all, you're not going to get anything out of it.
Yeah.
You're going to carry it. Executions, the first execution with Robert Harris, and I'm sorry
I remember.
to take up the time, but
No.
He asked me to go ask a lady, would she forgive him? He had written letters to her. One of the families wrote back and says, yes, we forgive you, but we want you to be executed.
So this is Robert Alton Harris.
Yeah, and the other lady hadn't responded, so he says, will you go and ask her? So I go and I ask her, and she says to me, tell him I said no. And I went back and I said, Robbie, she says no, and he sort of fell into his mattress. He was in a death watch cell, and I'm outside of it. And we just looked at each other, because he was not asking not to be executed. He was just asking, will you hear my voice when I say I'm sorry?
Yeah.
And there's a difference. And after he was executed, I walk into the room where all the visitors were, all the people, I call them spectators.
Yeah, in a way, that's what it is. You're right.
And she sees me, and she runs up to me and grabs my neck. And she's saying, did you tell him I said I forgive him? And I pulled her arms away, and I said, you told me to tell him no. Was she better as a result of seeing that execution? Yeah. Was she better as a result of him being executed? What he did, he paid for by the law of the state. Yeah. But was she, the family member, better as a result? No.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, one of the things you point out is just even the appeals process that is required for the capital punishment just puts so much of a burden on victims' families too, just to have it constantly rehashed.
Well, every time there's an appeal, every time there's a review, the family has to relive it. They have to go talk to the family. And so if you want to move on, and that person's on death row for 15, 20 years, and you're constantly being reminded of the crime, how can you, there's a lady whose son was a police officer that worked for the 49ers. And she was really driving for the death penalty. And I said to her, if you really want to move on, you want that guy to get life without, where you're not reminded of Jeff's death year after year. Yeah. And that's what I would say. So the moratorium on the death penalty, first of all, it's a flawed system.
Right, so we're executing people who are innocent.
If you Tom Thompson, look him up, you'll see that the Ninth Circuit, after he was executed, came out with a decision that he was probably innocent. And he was on my caseload, and I have like 8 guys that were on my caseload that are at home now. They're living in the community. They were on death row. And any of those guys that were executed, how can you reverse that?
You can never make it right again.
No, never.
Yeah, it's permanent.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's my issue with it, that once I know that there's one person that was innocent, I don't know how flawed the system can be, but I know one person that's executed, that's innocent, is one too many.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I mean, so much of what I got from your book, it's funny, I don't know if you feel like this as a pastor. I definitely do. I mean, I think like 80% of the people who come to me with some kind of pastoral issue, you know, whether it's about illness or someone they love or something they did that they don't feel good about. I mean, no matter what, is about 80% have something to do with forgiveness. And I wonder what you teach the people that you meet about forgiveness. What have you learned about forgiveness, and you know, how do you help people to make that leap?
For me, it wasn't seminary, it wasn't undergrad school, it wasn't reading all these different Bible
the
verses.
philosophy of forgiveness.
Because all that stuff sounds really great.
I know on paper.
But what I had to do was, the guy that shot me was in San Quentin.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought I had forgiven him. I thought I had moved on until I came face to face with him. I didn't know he was there. And as I looked at him, I realized I had not forgiven him, but I'm the chaplain. He's on an area where if I tell my friends,
right, completely.
he's the guy that shot me, because it was a contract yet, they'll kill him without me asking.
Right.
And as I walked down the tier, I understood I hadn't forgiven him. And I started to speak with God and say, why would you allow me to feel like I was whole and better, that my life had changed, yet when I saw him, I realized I was back to that guy that had a gun. I was back to that guy that wanted to harm. I was back to that guy that had no compassion. And I took that walk and I was crying. And when I came back to him, I looked at him and I said, I need to thank you because God used you to get to me. What I learned in that moment was we have to confront the thing that's harmed us, not just speak words. And even if that thing is deceased, once a year in the chapel, I have guys, our service would be in silence. And I need you to write down what's harmed you. I need you to write down who you've harmed, put it on a piece of paper, and I'd have this big pot.
Oh, yeah.
And one by one, they'd come up and they'd burn it and drop it in there.
Yeah, yeah.
And the reason I did that is I need you to know you can have a release, but forgiveness is confronting. Forgiveness is speaking to that thing, seeing it, visualizing it, and understanding that you can let it go. There's so many of us that talk about forgiveness, and we use all the right verses and all the right theological framework, yet the reality is we still carry. So in prison, whether it's sports, no matter what it is, society, are you prepared to confront that thing, speak to that thing, and say, let it go? For me, I had to do that.
Yeah.
And I believe a lot of us say those things, but we still carry them. So I said, we have to confront it. For guys on death row, whether they're professional athletes, there's so many things in common that they haven't, that are similar.
Yeah.
That
what I like
carry.
about it too is, I mean, God helps you with that. I mean, it's not like you just have to steel yourself and just do it all yourself. There's a way in which God...
You can't do it by yourself.
You can't do it by yourself.
You can't. You know, the thing that you have to do is trust God enough that he can take you beyond you.
Yeah.
A lot of the blockage is you, and not trusting God enough to take you beyond you.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. We have a tradition here. I can't believe I didn't tell you about this already. We take questions on note cards. So everybody has a note card, and Rebecca will collect the note cards, and I can read the note cards to you, the ones that I can read. My, best handwriting always gets first. I wonder what it was like for your kids growing up. I mean, it's like our kids lived in the rectory all the time, and that church house. And
Right.
what was it like for your kids growing up in the church house in San Quentin?
It was pretty cool.
Yeah.
We lived in a gated community,
Yeah.
right?
That's great. I'm gonna write that one down.
Yeah, so I mean, so it was pretty cool. We built a baseball field in the lower
right.
yard. We had a basketball court. There were other kids in the community. They would ride their bikes, and what I realized is we made community where we were. We were the first house. So kids would come there. My wife Angel was here with me, and she'd have food all the time for the kids, and the kids would just drop in to eat, and she'd sit around and they'd do their homework. And as they did all of that, our kids were like, but I work with professional sports, so my kids were all my sons. Every time I would go out to speak,
Right.
I would take them with me, and then if I would have them speak. And whatever, if I got an honorarium, if I didn't, I'd say, okay, this is what I got, and I'd split it with them. And so my boys would always get up early to go with me, but they played sports, and my daughters played, and we lived in this community, yet we also had a connection to the community beyond. But I credit my wife for a lot of that because I was working a lot, and she made the community work.
Yeah, that's so great. And I love to think of San Quentin maybe a horrible place for so many people, but for a handful of people, it's their childhood, and a wonderful childhood it was.
My kids still go back and take people, go through, and they drive around. They show people, this is where I live, this is where I ran my dog, this is where we played ball. They do all of these things. Because that was their home.
Yeah, that's so great. How did you start to get involved with professional sports? I mean, in retrospect, it makes all the sense in the world that a prison chaplain is working with young men and would be doing that same ministry. But I wouldn't have thought of it before I met you.
Well, part of professional, I got asked would I do a chapel service, and I did one, I did another, and before long I was doing one every week. I do the Raiders or the 49ers, so then I started doing the Warriors. I even did a Sharks a couple of times.
Oh, wow.
The thing that I tell people about professional sports, the same areas where you have professional athletes come from, the feeder counties across the United States are also the main feeder counties for the prison system.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, exactly.
So it's very similar. There's a separation that happens, but a lot of your professional athletes grow up in the same area as people in the prison. And if you go to Florida, Alabama, Texas, California, and you look at where are the feeder areas for the largest prison systems, those are also the main areas where a lot of your professional athletes come from. So it's very similar. So understanding that and understanding young men that may not have had a father figure or male figure in their life gives you as a pastor the opportunity to stand up and speak life into them. We talk about air. It's really, so many people deal with toxic air. So I tell.
Oh, yeah, right.
So for me, we come up with this acronym called accountability, integrity, responsibility, and that's AIR for us.
Right.
And for us, whether you're an athlete or whoever you are, I just want you to start breathing the different air. And so dealing with professional athletes, I've learned that they're very similar to my guys. They've just been able to get beyond some hurdles.
Is there any career path? Like if somebody here or who's watching this online really wants to be a chaplain for a professional sports team, is there any advice you have for them? Like how they would, begin to do that ministry?
I think the first thing you do is you start off by doing ministry with a high school, a college. You find there's different.
So it's like almost like connected to like youth ministry.
Well, yeah, I think it's like youth. A lot of pastors start off in youth ministry,
Yeah,
right?
that's what I did.
Yeah, and so there's a place that you start. You know, the thing that's really weird is there's only 32 chaplains in NFL.
Yeah, yeah.
There's only 30 in the NBA.
Right. It's
You
much
know,
easier to be an NFL player than it would be.
Yeah, yes, it
There's
is.
more of them than.
But there's how many colleges are there?
Yeah, right, right. Yeah. And all of them have needs for.
And all
for
of them
young
have
men.
needs. So sometimes you look beyond it. I used to tell people that would come minister at San Quentin, and they're from Southern California. I said, I'll let you come, but before you come, you have to go to another prison closer to where you are.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Because I don't want you to pass guys up
Yeah.
just so you can say you went to San Quentin.
Yeah, I thought that so much as I was reading your book, that just the men there just have more opportunity. If you're at Ione, you're out in the middle of nowhere and you just don't have quite as many opportunities.
If you're out high desert,
Right.
Susanville,
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Jamestown,
Yeah.
what about those guys?
Yeah.
Don't they need ministry as well?
Yeah, definitely.
So for me, that was one of the. If you're from Southern California, you have to let me know that you've gone somewhere else,
Yeah.
closer, before I let you do ministry at San Quentin.
Yeah, I like that. That's good. This is, do you think the prison system is more focused on punishment or rehabilitation? How did that focus affect your work and the capacity of people to rehabilitate or change?
Well, for a chaplain, the word is not rehabilitation; it's regeneration.
Yeah.
And it means a change of spirit, heart, mind. Rehabilitation, the California Department of Corrections decided to add an R, but they kept the same staff that had already been trained. Our policy is punishment, not rehabilitation.
Yeah.
So you grow up in a system that says the policy is punishment, not rehabilitation, then one day we're going to add an R, and you think overnight that R is going to change your thinking? No. So I don't believe, I believe that now with the programs that they're offering a lot more programs. So guys have the chance and the opportunity, men and women. My wife, Thursdays, she teaches at a prison.
Yeah.
So I say men and women have the opportunity now to make a decision of life changing. Yet the system is built to protect society. That's what they're saying. So I don't think the R makes a difference. And I always call it the R, rehabilitation. It's the staff that works there, and it's the people that are detained there that have to make the determination about the value of that R.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Colin Kaepernick's taking a knee it has been just a very inspiring civil rights moment. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that. How much has his career suffered as a result of it? And what do you think he holds for the future as a kind of leader?
I think that Colin and Eric Reed,
Yeah.
because it wasn't just Colin, it was Eric Reed, that made a determination and a decision. We were in San Diego, and I was meeting with Eric, and Eric says, I think I want to be with Cap.
Yeah.
And I said, what do you mean? He says, well, I don't want him by himself. He says, my heart tells me, and Eric is this unbelievable kid. If you know Cap,
Yeah.
he's like one of my wife's favorite people, and she loves him like a kid. Cap was affected by something. He was wounded by something, and he wasn't trying to make this massive stand.
Right.
He was just trying to be himself and say, I'm bothered.
Right.
And as they started to put the camera on and focus, him being bothered people.
Right.
But it didn't bother him enough to understand the message that people were being killed that were defenseless,
Right.
that people's lives were being taken, and it was almost like it was acceptable. No one was really speaking about it, and he internalized that. Cap did. He was there just saying, he was sitting on a cooler.
Right.
He wasn't trying to get out. He was just saying, I'm bothered.
Right.
So Eric says, I want to be with him. And so we discussed it. I said, well, if you kneel, no one should be bothered by a person that kneels, because kneeling is a sign of submission
And reverence and respect.
and reverence.
Yeah.
So they went from Cap sitting on that cooler to kneeling, and people were bothered by the kneeling, yet there are so many places of worship that this Sunday people will kneel down at the altar
Right.
and do the same thing. Eric, if you ever realize, he was just kneeling and praying for the country.
Yeah.
He was just praying that change could come, and people were bothered by the kneeling, and the message got twisted. But the message was really, when will we say there is hope? When will we say there's going to be a difference? So Cap's message was not hatred, but it was hope.
Right, right. And I agree. For me, they're heroic figures, and
I'm
it's
so proud of them, man.
yeah, I am
am
too.
so proud of
I am
those
too.
guys.
I just think
man.
it's absolutely extraordinary. I mean, that they're making a difference in the way that everybody. You're right. This invisible thing all of a sudden becomes something we're conscious
Well,
of.
he takes a hit where he can't do the thing that he loves to do, which is play ball, but there's principle involved, and I think people sometimes miss the fact that he was so principled that he was willing to not
sacrifice.
do
Yeah.
what he grew up saying he wanted to do.
Yeah.
Because he saw something as an adult that bothered him to the point that he had to say something.
You know, Harry Edwards was one of my teachers in college, and we would talk a lot about the Black Panther movement. And I wonder for you, I mean, as a kid, I mean, you know, growing up, I mean, you must have been so conscious of just what that movement meant. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how what it means to us has changed over time too.
Well, I think, when I was at San Quentin, I had Geronimo Pratt.
Yeah, exactly.
And Geronimo Pratt was Minister of Defense for the Black Panther Party, and he became one of the guys that I worked with, that I mentored, that became part of my chapel crew. And one day I get a knock on the door, and I open it, and it's Geronimo with this guy. And he says, "This is Huey Newton,
Wow.
and he needs you." The thing that was so significant was Geronimo was in prison because of Huey.
Yeah.
And he had vowed if he ever saw Huey, he'd kill him. Yet, instead of killing him, he brought him to the chapel and said, "This guy needs you." So that's when I started, and then I was able to sit down with Elvis Cleaver, and
Right,
and
yeah.
I'm listening to these guys, and I talked to them about what was it that you were trying to accomplish. And the focus was changed. The focus was, can we bring attention to pain and make people understand and say, ouch? So the things that they did was basically trying to affect people to a point of saying, ouch, I'm hurting. So many people took the party for a lot of different things. Yeah, there were elements of it that were crazy, but there was elements in the church that's crazy.
Right, completely.
So, there's people that, so you find that everywhere.
Yeah.
Yet, in talking to Huey, Geronimo, and some of these guys, I started to understand, my big thing was, why didn't you ever connect with the civil rights movement and, be this arm and be this force and they said, we felt like they weren't ready for us. I thought, wow.
Yeah.
They said, we watched them, we considered it, but we felt like they weren't ready for us.
Wow.
And it's pretty profound that they would think
It
that.
is profound, and I think just our picture of everything changes too, and just understanding about just even the relation between law enforcement and that movement, and I mean even just seeing the Super Bowl when everybody's dressed in the Black Panther outfits, things are changing. And
Well, I mean, what they're doing is there's this new focus on the reality that there is still pain.
yeah,
After all these years, we say that we've really moved on. But the question when you see the outfits, when you see the slogans is, how much have we moved on?
yeah, yeah,
I mean, cosmetics are good for one thing. They cover up blemishes.
right, right,
And I believe there's a lot of cosmetics in this country
Yeah.
that are covering up a lot of blemishes. But the blemishes don't change. They're still there.
yeah, yeah. It's really true. It's really true. But that's another element of continuity, is just, you have been that kind of person who's trying to heal the most serious pain that the country suffers, around
Yes.
racial reconciliation. But we have so many questions. Did you have any contact with the arts programs at San Quentin? Any impressions?
Yeah, I think we had something called Arts and Corrections, and I believe that the guy Jim Carlson was one of the first. Then Anita de Ortega became afterwards. The arts program is the one program that gives you an opportunity to express yourself without words. And you take this thing and you start to draw and you start to see people come alive. We had this guy, Ron Sanders. If you ever see these things called dot art where they just use a pencil and do Ron Sanders started that. And all these other people do it. But, he was on death row and he just started doing this and making figures and things and unbelievable art. But that was his expression. Imagine how many times he did this to create something.
Right.
So the arts program was just unreal. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, I was just thinking, most of the art that I have is from prison because I haven't bought them. It's just been gifts from people. Dear Reverend Earl Smith, I feel as though I've been on a spiritual journey of forgiving others. What I am struggling with is how do I ask for forgiveness from all the people I have hurt, manipulated, used, lied, caused suffering to? My heart hurts very deeply for all the pain I have caused, especially in my times of addiction.
Well, I think that in your time of addiction, whoever wrote that, it wasn't you, it was your addiction that was doing it. And within the framework of that addiction, I would tell you the same thing I tell my guys. There's people that you can't speak to, that you're still carrying that thing. Write it down. Write your expressions down, write what you're feeling down, and put it somewhere, burn it, and release it. And here's the way you know it's been released. Watch the smoke go up. See if you can grab the smoke after it starts to go up. See if you can grab that thing. And just like you can't grab it, it's released. Trust yourself enough to believe it's been released. That's what I would say.
Yeah, forgiveness is the power to leave the past in the past.
Yes.
Okay, at Stanford, there is a professor who specializes in forgiveness. His idea is that lack of forgiveness actually hurts the one who does not forgive.
That's very true.
Yeah, and I do not believe in capital punishment. The acts done by an individual just reflect the ills of society. This idea of capital punishment is just trying to deal with society's ills, but not the way to do this. So that's good. 2 statements for us. Can you address what positive role for white people might be in our racially divided time? Late in the game, I turned to teaching in West Oakland. I'm still close to several students and families from that time. Now it's said only people of color should teach children of color. I see this idea spreading. What would you suggest a white person can do to contribute?
Well, I can only go back to the prison, first of all. And what I would tell people, white guys that were 30, 35 years old, they say, I have nothing in common with those guys. I've never been arrested. I said, man, wow. What capital do you have? You can go in with your capital. You've never been arrested. You've had all these other experiences, and you can speak. But first of all, when you go in, don't go in to speak, go in to listen. Because sometimes in your listening, your words will change. Yet I believe that race, without both races or all races working together, there can be no teaching. So to say that a black kid has to be taught by a black guy, I think you rob that kid. And for me, I believe that there should be a unity of all. That it's almost like this picture. I used to have a card that had all these different hands that were all different colors, and they made a circle. And I believe the same thing with teaching. I believe the same thing with sharing. You have to include everyone to make everything work. Without the inclusion of everyone, everything will not work. And the problem we have now is separation. This country is so divided. This country is so segregated. I mean, and the segregation just breeds more segregation because the children that are growing up in the segregation start to believe that it's natural to be segregated. Except you bridge that and bring different races together, our next generation will be just like this one that we're living in.
Yeah. One of the things you've done is you were ministering with Steve Young when he had his concussion that ended his career. I wonder just how the players are doing with just the concussion issues and just how that kind of changes the pastoral landscape in the NFL.
Well, you know, it was a time when guys would get a concussion and they'd have this smelling sauce.
Right, I totally remember that.
They do like this. If you ever watch a guy, he's just doing like that, that means he got they call him I got dinged.
Yeah, right.
Well, now when you see a guy that has a concussion, they take him off the field, I usually try to follow them into the locker room. And when they finish doing all their protocol, I want to talk to them, I want to talk to their families. And I just want, and then every day I want to check with them, how are you doing? It's nothing to do with me, yet I understand that there are people that I know that played the game that had so many concussions, and they thought it was okay because you had to play.
Right.
So for me, when guys have that, I just want to hear, tell me how you're doing. Tell me what your clarity is. Because when the game is over, you're still going to have to, most guys retire at 30 years old from professional sports. Imagine that, retired at 30. All those other years that you have to live. Consider those years.
Yeah. Well, that's great to remind, because when you're young, I mean, that was part of the reading that was so powerful about you. It's just like you were invincible. I used to be invincible too.
Yeah.
And, you know,
and then we grew up.
Then we grew up. But that's what I like about that. It's just like it is a long life, and this little section of your life it has its own magic, but there's a much larger section that's after this, and not to lose sight of that.
Yes.
You know, this year is the year of the body as our theme, and it's been fascinating. So we've had experts on biology, and we've had people who do yoga practices. But I wonder what you might have to teach us about the body, just both about people who are imprisoned bodies, and then also about just professional sports people who have so much pressure on their bodies.
Well, the thing I learned about the body is conditioning builds the body.
Yeah.
And professional athletes condition themselves. I tell people, if you live in LA and you run track and you're maybe this superstar, and then we tell you that you're going to go to Colorado Springs.
Oh, right.
And you're going to the Olympic Training Center. The first thing that happens is you realize you can't run because you've been used and conditioned to breathe dirty air.
Yeah.
And now you're in a place where it's clean. So I tell people all the time, consider the air you're breathing. Consider what you're taking in, and then decide if what you're taking in will take you where you need to go. Yeah. And if you do that with your body, if you start to understand maybe some of this stuff I'm taking in, I'm digesting, I'm breathing in, there's no capital, there's no quality to it beyond where I am. And that's the same with your body. If you're treating your body properly, wherever you want to go, your body will respond positively.
Yeah, waking up to our body again.
Yes.
You know, I wonder, I mean, I didn't even fully appreciate just all the different facets of your career until I even sat down in the chair. I mean, so we met, read the book, that wasn't enough. I started making connections that I just didn't make until we were sitting here together. But I wonder what signs of hope you see. I mean, there's so much negativity, and there's so much segregation, and there's so much hatred. What signs of goodness do you see, around you now?
Right here.
Yeah.
Think about this. We're sitting here having a dialogue right now, and we're talking about hope. And I believe that there's pockets like this throughout the country that we're not aware of, that people are getting together in these small groups, pastors, saying, let's just have a dialogue. And for me, that's a sign of hope. Worship service in America is the most segregated time in this country. And that's so weird.
That's so weird to me, too.
Yet, when you as a pastor say, we're having an open forum, we'd like to have you come in and we can all sit together and have a conversation. If that's not hope, what is it?
Yeah, amen, amen. And there's so much we could have talked about we couldn't get to,
Yeah.
but I have to go preach a sermon.
No, you did say that, right?
I do, because even just the story of you being called, and there's so much more. But thank you so much for being here. I have a few announcements, and then we'll start clapping for you.
Well, wait a minute now.
Oh, I know they will. I know this group. Next week, we're going to have Reverend Nadim Nassar. He's the only Syrian-born Anglican priest in the world. And we'll be talking about his work with the Awareness Foundation, which through education empowers children and young people in Syria and Iraq to build peace in that region. You're welcome to join us upstairs. If you can, make a gift on your way out. We'd appreciate that. That helps us. And I want to thank Earl Smith, one of the most inspiring heroes of forgiveness that I can think of our time. Thank you so much for being
for having me here. Appreciate it. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm so grateful for this.